This is I'd like to present on my take on the Paris Agreement because given at the rate that it's going, it's they're trying to limit that with a certain increment in temperature, and given time we will just reach a point in which human will extinct, right? I mean, at the rate that
Mm,
it's going, it will we will reach that point at some time, and that's not good enough, although that might be the best we could have done at that time. So I want to discuss some theoretical background about what I think about the issue. So the talk is augmentation of the Paris Agreement with punitive measures and its mandatory participation. So let's look at the climate politics. So very roughly, everyone would agree that greenhouse gas emission, and it contributes to continuous global warming. It's a very simple fact. Everyone knows that. Given that we want to prevent human extinction, less to no emission, greenhouse gas emissions constitutes cooperation and defection otherwise. So given that we want to prevent everyone dead in some future, no emission or at least less emission with a carbon neutrality, that's towards cooperation. The less emission we have, the better the cooperation. And if we did the other way around, that's defection. And defection is in the opposite of cooperation. So typically people defect because of economic gains, right? Because if the more
mm,
carbon you use, the more fossil fuels you burn,
yeah.
you will make more money. So that's very simple politics, right? Everyone understands that, everyone knows that. So one way in economics or game theory to understand defection is with the prisoner's dilemma, and with the prisoner's dilemma, there's a very simple contractual solution which goes a little bit beyond, because prisoner's dilemma usually there's no information exchange and it's usually not a repeated game. So I'll just pick up from prisoner's dilemma and talk about a very typical contractual solution and use that theoretical insight to the politics of climate to given the historical fact that's the Paris Agreement, and because right now the Paris Agreement, the non-compliance are not punished, not at all. So something needs to be done. And furthermore, because like the U.S., even if Barack Obama joined the Paris Agreement, they Donald Trump he
He left.
yeah, he
Yeah.
left. So I want to also talk about mandatory participation. Okay, so it's just some very simple background about decision theory. So
Mm,
decisions with determined outcomes. Let's say the outcome you want is to make enough money for to have a house, to have a flat, and have time for some vacations. So among all epistemic possibilities, among all ways the world might be, you look into the future, it may be this way, it may be that way, and among things that you know might happen, some things are deontically plausible, which is some there are things that you may do. So you may not steal, you may not you may there are many things you may not do, but among things you may do, one way is to let's say I kill. To kill is to study philosophy, let's say, and by studying philosophy, the outcome of having enough money to have a flat and have time to go on vacation is very small among possibilities. So the probability is very low. And to IP maybe to study a business or even climate science right now, the
mm,
probability of having that outcome may be larger. So
mm,
among these things, if the outcome you're it doesn't matter to you how you make that money, then you would want that. You want a P, and which is to study a business, and the probability of achieving that outcome, given you want that outcome, will be larger. So this is a very simple way to do
mm,
theory, right? It's very simple. And I did that without using any math, but sometimes we don't always look at one single outcome. Maybe there are various outcomes, and then outcomes would have different utilities, how good they are. We assign different values to the outcomes. You might get more money, or maybe you want more health. And these
Mm.
things will interact also with probabilities.
Mm.
And so let's say now you have a job, you're working in an office, but someone somewhere seem to be offering a job for you, which has the potential with better pay. So you're considering whether to attend an interview. So one way is to stay with the job you have, then you will have 100% probability of winning
Mm.
$20,000. You just stay with the job and get the pay. Or maybe you take a leave of absence, take a morning's leave and attend an interview. You may got caught and your boss may fire you. So
Mm.
that's 10% of not winning the 2,000 that you already have, which means you have 90% of winning $20,000, but then you have 20% probability of winning $40,000 because you might get a job, right?
Mm.
A slight chance. So among these two, it depends on how you calculate risk. But if you compare two with three, three would be when you take a leave of absence to attend an interview, but your boss will not find out, or maybe he's a very kind boss. He understands that
Mm.
young people want to make more money. So even
Mm.
if he knows that you attend an interview, he would not fire you. He understands that. So 100% of keeping the 2,000, well, and then there's 20% of winning 40,000. So that's another option. And the other option, and the other uh, possible decision is yes, you will still have a 10% probability of being fired, but the probability of getting hired and getting more pay will be 30%. So among these four uh, way, maybe if you're choosing between one and three, you would want to do that. But if you're choosing between two and four, four would be something you're more likely to do because the probability is more of getting $40,000.
Mm.
So that's how probability also interact with how you make decision when you're ranking among different outcomes. And game, uh, beyond decision theory, we have game theory. Game would simply be decision under uncertainty about other players' decisions. So because just then the decision theory, the outcome maybe depends on how others make decisions, but in the end, it's the uncertainty is about what you will get. But game depends on your uncertainty about what other players will decide, and others players' decision, like our own, depends on their utility function, the utility, how
Mm.
much they value various things,
Mm.
probability function, what they think are likely, and also their rationality, because
Mm.
usually in economics, we would just assume that people are rational, but we have to bring in the measure, the variable, because some are rational, some are more rational, some are even irrational. So we have to bring in that measure. So this is the typical prisoner's dilemma. So let's say you and I, we conspire to go into a company and try to steal their secret, and then
And
we got
then
caught. Both of us got
yeah,
caught, and
there's a plea deal,
yeah, the
right?
plea,
Like,
and then there's the plea deal and otherwise. So the police said either you confess or not. The other guy is going to confess. Of course, you can't
mm.
tell whether the other guy did confess. And
Mm.
if both of us did not confess, so you see the bottom right corner,
Mm.
not confess, then maybe each of us will get let's say 1 year in prison because they do have some evidence, but it's not enough to charge us with a very serious crime. Uh,
Mm.
but if we both confess, we will both get to be in jail for 8 years because that's a very
Mm.
serious crime. But if one of us confess, the other does not, the one that does not confess, well, he or she will be mitigated because maybe that's a plea deal. You read the other one out, then we have the evidence. You will be the witness against the other guy, and then you will go free, but the other
Mm.
guy will stay in jail for 10 years. And the dominance reasoning is that, so let's look at, given that we don't know whether let's look at a green column. So I'm deciding between confess or not confess.
Mm.
If I confess, well, it depends on whether, let's say if the green, the yellow, the blue one confessed. So either way, if the blue one confess, my confession will leave me with 8 years in jail instead of 10.
Mm.
And if the blue one did not confess, my confession will also leave me with 0 years in jail instead of negative 1 year in jail.
Mm.
Either way, confessing is better than not
Mm.
confessing, right? So whatever the other guy will choose, confession is turn out to have a better outcome. So that's the dominance reasoning, such that whatever the other guy do, confession is better. Whatever your conspirator's decision,
Mm.
you know the other guy thinks the same way as you do, so it will turn out. People call it a Nash equilibrium. That we will. It's almost like a rational decision that both of us confess. Which, if we can cooperate, it's better that both of us did not confess. Maybe we get 1 year in jail, but in total, we will spend much more time being in prison, right? So,
Mm.
so this is the prisoner's dilemma. And when we apply the same reasoning to greenhouse gas emission, maybe some people would argue that this does not translate, but that's for future argument. But if let's say there are various countries, let's say there are only two countries in the world.
Mm.
If both emit greenhouse gas, let's ignore the amount. So either you do or you don't, and if you do, then both of the country will suffer from global warming as the state of the world as it is. It will continue to suffer from global warming, and then in the end, the extinction of humanity, both country. But we will get some economic gain, right? We will
Mm.
grow some crops and live maybe a little bit better life. So both of us emitting will get a -8 um, utility. And if only one of us emits, then both of us will still suffer from global warming, but one of us will gain a little bit. Let's say the gain is so much that it will offset the suffering. So maybe the country that emits a lot of greenhouse gas, let's say there's the USA, right? They have some heavy industry and they're making a lot of money. Yes, the whole world will suffer, but they gain by having a better life because of the fact that they make more money. And the non-emitter will suffer as well, but without any gain. So
Mm.
yeah. So on the other hand, if both parties or even all country do not emit, then maybe we will still live with some remnants from past pollution. But at least it won't be that bad, right? We may not
Mm.
do so well with the economy. We might get -1 instead of 0, but at least as a whole, we will generally maybe even recover from to steer the course from human extinction to having a future for humanity. So both not emitting is the cooperative strategy, but it's almost rational on economic theory that we don't cooperate
Mm.
and we continue to emit. So this is the problem using the game theory to understand the problem. And typically, when you look at, suppose when we get into the company, we were sent by a mafia, and then this actually solves the problem because if the mafia boss, when we go in, he said that if you're caught and you confess, you rat out the other guy, even if you got released from
Prison.
police custody, they're gonna do something to you. So that's the
Okay.
mafia's justice, right? So that's the
Mm.
confession will be severely punished when on the street. So that's very simple. The mafia does that. So that's why the tried members are scared and they don't confess because this is just if you contrast that on the right, it's just adding uh, -50 to confession, right?
Mm.
You can see that. So when in that case, confession is not the dominant strategy. It's even the worst strategy, right? So
Mm.
with that stipulation by the mafia's boss, no confession dominates. It's better not to confess. So whatever the other guy does, it's better that you didn't confess, even if you confess and the other guy, even if even if you did not confess, let me see. Yeah. In any case, it seems the confession will get you better outcome without the mafia's boss. But now with him and his stipulation that if you confess, he's going to do something to you when you're on the street.
Not confessing is the better choice.
Yeah, and both party knows that, and that's much better. As it turns out that the threat is a better thing for both parties, right? So, so similarly, if we have punitive measure on
Carbon tax.
defection or on emission, right? Greenhouse gas emission. It's not the kind of mafia boss thing. It's just maybe a carbon tax, maybe a very extreme one. Maybe the taxation is so high that it's like adding 50 on top
It's
of
very
8.
extreme.
Yeah. I don't know how this will work, but it's a suggestion that if the cost of emission is increased through emission being punished, maybe probably easiest way would be economically, because among nations they do tariff and they have embargoes. That's the way they bargain with other nations, right? Economically. So an extra, yeah. So it's on emission, not on convection. On emission, an extra 50 on emission. No emission, that's dominant. So it's better not to emit greenhouse gas, whatever the other person does. So so that's just a simple game theoretic understanding of defection applied to climate cooperation. But of course, although there were mafia boss, there are no climate police, right? Right now, there's no climate police. So instead of mafia bosses or government interventions, right now, at this moment, head of state just enter into contractual relation with one another, and especially the Paris Agreement. But even if you defect, even if you did not keep up with your word that you're gonna keep carbon emission to a certain level, such that everyone, the whole world, would have guaranteed not an increase by 1.5 degrees Celsius within a certain period of time, even if everyone promised that, but non-compliance is not punished, right? So that's somewhat on your conscience. And the problem is that because you did not know that the other guy uh, is in a position like having a mafia boss threatening him to cooperate. So it's more likely that the other guy would not cooperate. And given that the other guy doesn't cooperate, it might have turned out that you did not cooperate as well, right? So that's how the reasoning goes. So, but however, there's no climate police like a mafia boss, and heads of state enter into agreement voluntarily. And right now, the agreement doesn't have any punitive measures, right? So if there were, the cooperation will be easier. It's like if you defect, there are very high cost, but if each one cooperate, everyone will be much better. And the point is, after the punitive measure, we got this. We're more certain that, so suppose I'm the green boxes and I'm thinking about what the other guy would do, and the blue boxes, we're given his or her rationality. We know that he or she has 99% to cooperate, because even he or she knows that it's better to do that instead of usually a 50-50 chance, or, because after the punitive measures, then we know better how the other person will decide. So we will be more rest assured when we decide to cooperate. So that's the rough idea about augmenting the Paris Agreement with punitive measures such as carbon taxes. But then, of course, there's a rationality variable. What I just assume is that everyone assigns a positive utility of better life with a favorable environment. Everyone wants to continue living with a good life and a probability of leading better life on cooperation. So we know that if we cooperate, we'll have a higher chance of leading a better life. So these are what's given. We assume of the other person, but why is that there's a chance that the other player does not cooperate? Well, because there's a chance that they're irrational, right? Because it's laid down right very clearly that cooperation is the best thing to do. but there's still a slight chance that they don't, because there might be irrational players
Mhm.
who are in the position to make decisions. So the rationality variable, that's typically not from economic theory or decision theory, game theory, but I have to include that because that's honestly the reality. Yeah. So at the present situation, the Paris Agreement, well, it's just to restate what we already know. Heads of state decided whether to sign and whether to comply, right? So enter into partnership, that's a free choice. And even compliance is a free choice. Free in a way that non-compliance will not be imposed with punishment. So you enter into that, that's a pact, but whether you comply, that's no one is going to coerce you to comply. No one, well, the enforcement of the agreement is just something, as we call it, maybe it's something political, but not
Mhm.
anything else. It's not by rule or by legality that you will be punished. So augmentation with punitive measures betters cooperation through a rational choice of compliance. So after the punitive measures, we can even calculate that it's only rational, even internally. It's a better chance of doing better by complying with the original agreement. So that's the present situation, and this is where that gets that I, besides adding punitive measures, I'm thinking about something more, because if there's a group of nations that rectify the Paris Agreement, but then there's some that don't, such as the USA, then it's still a problem, because even if everyone within that agreement observe the agreement and they play by the rules, and because, let's say, for fear of punitive measures, they cooperate very good. But as long as there's one, especially the USA or maybe even China, that's a very big emitter of greenhouse gas, then it doesn't make much difference, right?
Yeah,
So
it
yeah,
offsets the positives. Yeah.
yeah. So I have to think about what the purpose of the United Nations is. The USA is a member of the United Nations, of course. So Article 1 of the Charter of the United Nations, I'm going to read this
Mm.
just to rehearse something very important. Now, this is to the letters. The purposes of the United Nations are to maintain international peace and security, and to that end, to take effective collective measures for the prevention and removal of threats to the peace, and for the suppression of acts of aggression or other breaches of the peace, and to bring about by peaceful means and in conformity with the principles of justice and international law, adjustment or settlement of international disputes or situations which might lead to a breach of the peace. To develop friendly relations among nations based on respect for the principle of equal rights and self-determination of peoples, and to take other appropriate measures to strengthen universal peace, to achieve international cooperation in solving international problems of an economic, social, cultural, or humanitarian character, and in promoting and encouraging respect for human rights and for fundamental freedoms for all without distinction as to race, sex, language, or religion, and to be a center for harmonizing the actions of nations in the attainment of these common ends. Okay,
Mhm.
so this, of course, it was written in the context of after the World War II and the atrocity that people would commit among each other in world wars. So peace and justice, people have in mind something like, violence, war, whatever the war does. That's what people have in mind. But at this moment, when we think about justice and peace, I think we should also think about what people discuss under the heading climate justice. So climate justice is something like this. So there are people in, let's say, in the Southeast Asia, that there are a lot of floods, and the natural habitat, let's say, that wherever they live, is more prone to flooding, and they sometimes they even have to move somewhere else. So that's bad for them, but they are not the biggest greenhouse gas emitters, right? So it's like they're suffering for someone else's crime. and that's unjust. So one way to look at climate justice, and what I just described were climate refugees. They might have to move from wherever they are because of the climate change, right? Because
Yeah.
the places are no longer habitable.
Mm-hmm.
And that's injustice because that's unfair treatment.
Mm-hmm.
They are not, well, if being coerced to move away from wherever they are, if losing their home is a punishment, then they're being punished for something that they did not do. They're not punished for some wrong they did. So that's injustice, and it's unfair in a way that if those that emitted too much greenhouse gas, if they are the one that got punished, that seems fairer. Although that's still bad because it's better that no one got punished, right? So if those that emit the greenhouse gas got punished themselves, if they are the climate refugee, or more to the point, maybe the U.S. The citizens of USA, well, or maybe in China, or maybe even India, those that emit most greenhouse gases, if they turn out to be the climate refugees, they just suffer for their own crimes, right? So that's fairer than someone else is suffering for their own crime. So on justice, everyone have to do something, right? So if everyone is equal, then no one deserves to suffer not for their own crime. And thereby climate justice obligates participation of members of the United Nations in the augmented Paris Agreement. So that's a point that I want to push, and it will, beyond the punitive measures thing, even this is much more difficult because even a court, international criminal court of justice, international court of justice, and the United Nations Security Council, even their resolutions are sometimes not complied by the members. So I mean,
Mm-hmm.
even if on uh, on to the letters on paper, there are obligations, legal obligations that nations have to do, but international law and the enforcement, the legality, it's very complicated, and there's a lot of politics involved. But to ignore those reality, ignore those nuances in the political reality, I think that's what being a member of the United Nations have to do. So contractually, by being a member of the United Nations, it the membership commits its members to climate justice, and to achieve climate justice, they have to join the Paris Agreement with the punitive measures augmentation. So instrumentally, because that's the means to the end with the Paris Agreement augmented. So that's what I think. And it's just a recap. Justice obligates cooperation with peace, uh, climate justice, and even the members of the United Nations, they all sign up for justice. And peace is the part and parcel of justice. So if we want that, we have to cooperate, and cooperation is bettered with punitive measures on defection. So that's what I want to do, at least, is to look at how Paris Agreement come about. And I don't think that those people that got involved in the politics and the and the legislation and everything behind the Paris Agreement, I don't think they have never thought about what I thought about. And I want to look at what they went through and how they end up with an easier agreement, which people just decide to join. And then after they've decided to join, they can decide whether to comply. So it's more on each head of state's conscience what then whether to comply. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so that's when it gets very difficult with the politics. But at least we got the cooperation theories right, and yeah, that's the hope.